and I've just had an amazing introduction to this topic, so well done to Rebecca for the scheduling of this event. So you've got a really good background on translocations and fire management for species already. Also, I'd just like to note that obviously I'm a bit out of my geographic range, and so is the Mallee Emu-wren. So I do want to tell this story just because it's a great story to be telling and a good positive success story, but also want to include a few things that make it a bit of a case study and lessons I've learned and our team has learned, which could be applied to any sort of conservation project. So I'll have this little star for keys to success during the project. Okay, so yes, but first let's start with some Mallee Emu-wren basics. So this is a tiny endangered bird, and by tiny I mean 5 grams. And here are some other things which weigh 5 grams. And as well as being tiny and endangered, it's entirely dependent on this hummock grass, which is Trobe University. And it's found only in northwest Victoria, and that's because wildfires have wiped it out from South Australia, where it used to also exist. And it's never existed north of the Murray River, which acts as a biogeographic barrier for the species. So today the major threats we're talking about are large wildfires wiping out whole populations and inappropriate fire management. So how did it come to this? We're looking at this Murray-Mallee region in southeastern Australia, and we usually think of these reserves as quite large, intact reserves, and we call them wilderness areas. But as you can see from this image, it's actually a network of fragmented reserves in an agricultural matrix, which is a system we're all familiar with. So despite that, here's the network, and it's actually quite recent clearing, so only in the soldier settler era, 20s and 30s, and now we're in this system of extinction debt, and we're paying the debt for all that clearing now with multiple bird declines. So we still have good Mallee Emu-wren populations in Murray Sunset and Hattah National Park, and a smaller, recently rediscovered population in Big Desert. But we've, after wildfires in 2014, they've gone extinct from Billiat and Narcat in South Australia, and we haven't seen them in these smaller eastern reserves since the 1970s. So this is a really precarious position to be in for a Mallee Emu-wren in this landscape, which is prone to large wildfires, and the risk was, and the fear was, that one more bad wildfire season could wipe out the whole species before we had the chance to do anything. So here's the first key point in this story is it's possible that with a different perspective on fire management and more proactive fire management, we wouldn't be in this precarious position in the first place if we could have managed these initial fires better. But here we are, and hopefully we can learn from it so it doesn't happen again. And here's the key moment which hasn't come to pass yet. This is we're trying to translocate Mallee Emu-wrens back into these populations, and it's a lot of trouble. It's really hard with no promise of success. But we actually have this population in Big Desert we know nothing about. So I think there's huge replacement value for this population, and it's yet to be seen if we're going to learn enough about it to save it before it gets wiped out by fire. So that's the one to watch. So what happened after these wildfires in South Australia? So a year later, BirdLife negotiated a pause on burns of critical habitat with the fire managers of Victoria, which are DELP. And they also gained a seat on this Mallee Fire Advisory Committee, which is a room of stakeholders in the region talking to fire managers as a dialogue. And they created a conservation action plan for Mallee birds. So if we look at this in a more a broader perspective, what they've actually done is highlight to managers that this is a live issue. This is something that needs to be addressed. You can't just keep burning without thinking about these things. Then gave birds a voice in the room. So as an advocate, as for the first time, birds were a stakeholder in the region, which is a really cool thing to do. And then offered a solution for what needs to be done. That's just textbook amazing advocacy, and credit to Jenny in particular for all of that work. So if we look at that conservation action plan, what does it recommend for the Mallee Emu-wren? Well, it recommends at least 4 geographically distinct population to spread the risk of wildfire, and strategic burning which reduces wildfire but doesn't damage emu-wren populations. So from now on, I'll go through these 2 points to look at how we're saving the Mallee Emu-wren. Okay, so the first one, at least 4 geographically distinct populations. So we have 3 populations already, as I showed you. So we want a 4th one, and we're returning them into Narcat in South Australia, where there's still some good habitat that wasn't burnt. So yeah, you've got a good background from Saul on translocations, so I'll just make it look very easy in this one slide on how we're doing that at the moment. So yeah, as Saul said, secure funding and permits. All right, tick, done. And then catch emu-wrens in Victoria. So yeah, assemble your crack team, chase birds into a trodia hummock, throw a net over, bird in the hand, easy. Step 3, measure birds and drive them to South Australia. So we did that overnight also, and they seem to manage okay with overnight. And then step 4, release birds and monitor their success. So we've done one round of that, 40 birds, and we're doing another 40 birds next week, and so far it's all going really well. So keys to success in this component was not the most exciting component, but a really key component was secure funding and permits, and that's because this component was hard work, often unpaid, and with no promise of success. So people putting in the hard yards when a project could fall down if there weren't passionate people willing to do these things. And then, of course, the huge volunteer effort. I mean, without these volunteers, we wouldn't have been able to do any of this with the budget we had. And yeah, absolutely key to the whole project. And amazing people, all of them. Everyone in that thing definitely had enough expertise to be deserving a wage, but that's not how it works, but really good, yes. Okay, so move straight on to the second thing we need to do for the Mallee emu-wren, which is strategic burning to minimise reserve scale wildfire. So here's Murray Sunset National Park, which is, it contains almost all the Mallee emu-wrens in the world, probably 90%. And here's the burn plan, the current burn plan. So as you can see, it's already breaking the park up into segments, trying to reduce the risk of large wildfires. But what we don't know is, should we also be burning to regenerate habitat? And there's some areas we should never burn because they're important for the species. So these are the questions I want to answer with my PhD, and we really have to go back to basics, fire ecology basics for these species to answer these questions. So I'll show you some of my findings now. So first we have to look at the fire effects for Trodia, which is its habitat. So here's what Trodia does after a fire. So a fire comes through and there's no Trodia around. Then it slowly recovers until it peaks around 30 years, and that is amazing Mallee emu-wren habitat in that photo there. And then it declines and senesces, and it's no good for Mallee emu-wrens anymore. So this curve is now driving fire management, so that you would burn this older vegetation to bring it back to a state that it would grow for Mallee emu-wrens again. But as you can see with this curve, there's huge uncertainty around those fire responses at the older fire ages. So I wanted to know, why is it uncertain, and what does it mean for the Mallee emu-wren? So I dug a little deeper into this Trodia curve. So I was focusing on these older fire ages with the uncertainty. So the one reason for the uncertainty is this study was done over a huge geographic area, 3 states. But if we split that up and look to the different geographic areas, you can see, yeah, the curve holds really well for New South Wales and South Australia. You see the peak and then the decline. But in Victoria, where the Mallee emu-wren is, you see less of a peak and not really a decline, just a whole lot of noise really. So after 30 years since fire, it's just, nothing's really happening. So I wanted to do my own study and see if I could get a different result. So I went and surveyed my own sites and collected my own data, and exactly the same result. What do you know? But while I got this result, I thought it could be very easy that 2 completely different fire responses, driven by some other environmental factor, could be masked and to make it look like one fire response with a heap of noise. So then in another system I saw Mallee emu-wrens and Trodia responding a lot to elevation, and so I included elevation in my models, and it turns out, I'll give you a spoiler, it is elevation, and I'll show you a new curve now showing that. So here's what is actually going on. These small changes in elevation are making 2 completely different fire responses for Trodia. So if you look at the blue line, that's at sites with low elevation. So you see you get more dense Trodia, maybe a slight decline, but not really, and it stays good no matter what the fire age is. Whereas if you look at slightly higher elevation, say 60 metres, you see less of a decline, less of an increase, and it's slower, and then at the older fire ages you see it declining again. So that seems to be what's going on here, and that has huge implications for management of fire for this species, so that you're going to have one best fire management protocol for low elevation areas and a different one for high elevation areas. So that really helped us improve the management here. But that was for Trodia. I also ran the analysis for Mallee Emu-wrens and hoping very much to get the same result. And so I ran this analysis with bated breath, but I did get the same result. And as you can see, these low elevations areas are super important for Mallee Emu-wrens. This blue line, that's where all the Mallee Emu-wrens are, in low elevations. And also, they're there at the oldest fire ages as well, which is not something we thought before. Whereas at high elevations, completely different fire response in the orange line. So that has implications for fire management. And let me show you an example of that in this really important area in Western Murray Sunset, where there's heaps of them. So I'm not sure if that's showing up so well. Does that look all right? Or?
Yeah, it's not bad.
Okay, so the pink is low elevation, the blue is higher elevation, and now I'll put up all the emu-wren records we have in the database. And that's it. So looking at it there, you think, how did we not realise we're so wrong? Really, it's a bit embarrassing. But elevation is driving this system heaps, way more than fire or anything. And so that means these areas are really, really important, and we've got to treat them differently. So I took those model results and I can put it over Murray Sunset on a map, and yeah, here's the result of that. And the first thing you might see is this really important area in Western Murray Sunset. So I'll use that as a case study to see how elevation gives us a new way of managing fire. Okay, so here it is, Western Murray Sunset. And as you can see, the first thing that probably draws your eye is these huge strip burns running straight through the hotspot. Yeah, it's obviously not ideal fire management. And now I put up the burn management plan for upcoming burns, and it looks like that. And this original idea was to put a third one again to roll them across. So that was all planned and done before we had these results, before we knew, and super excited and happy to say that those burns aren't going ahead. I mean, so the fire managers were co-funding this work. They wanted to know more about this species. They want to manage fire better. And so they were happy to see this, not angry to see it, and that was a great thing as well. So they're gone. So we've still got a pretty good hotspot for Mallee Emu-wrens. And in future, instead of burning this area, it'll just be put burns around it and hopefully have priority for first attack in a wildfire event as well. So treat it as more of an asset. Okay, so have we got success for the Mallee Emu-wren? So the Conservation Action Plan I mentioned earlier, it recommended 4 geographically distinct populations. So far that's looking good with our translocations. Early days, but looking good. And strategic burning, which reduces wildfire risk without damaging the populations, also looking really good with that one. Sorry, I just want to say, so they're early days, but promising signs, but there's still a lot more work to do, including being sure we're not going to make the same mistakes again, being sure that we're not going to lose populations in more wildfires the next bad fire season. So that's the ongoing goals. Okay, so that's pretty much it for me with my project, and I just want to highlight a few of the lessons that our group learnt from this project, and I learnt from this project. So a lot of the things we've mentioned already, and I'm sure a lot of you are already aware of all of these things, are just learnings that I've made. So one is this long-term standardised research. I mean, this is all this is built on work that was done in 2006 for a separate Mallee Fire biodiversity project, and it set the groundwork for all of this research, and none of this program could have been done without that base knowledge, and resurveying them with whatever funding we can find currently and ongoing has given some really good data, not just for this project but for other projects as well. Not easy to find funding for though, as we've heard. Collaboration. So the amazing diversity of skills that different organisations have brought to this table has been incredible, and it's definitely no exaggeration to say no one organisation could have done any of this. So absolutely key. Again, especially in this tight funding environments we're in today, more and more important to be getting in-kind support from one another and working in that way. 3, people, as you all know, people are interested in conservation, and we need to harness that. I mean, we saw a whole section on it this morning, which is great to hear about. And yeah, just as well as just the great thing it is to have engagement of people and have people involved, just genuinely the amount of person hours we've had on the ground has been, it would have been impossible to do any other way, so absolutely key again. And BirdLife as an advocate, having a voice in the room, this was absolutely key to changing management outcomes for Mallee Emu-wren, and it still is in this region for a range of Mallee birds, so huge plus there. And finally, this one I'm not so good at. I'm not sure how we should do it, but I think we should talk about it. We need to inspire change in others, because we need to be getting in and changing perceptions in the room of managers, say South Australian fire management, for instance. How do we encourage them to treat the scrub as an asset that they need to protect? Yeah, it's a very tricky one. So, I mean, we've touched on it, but definitely a challenge. So, yeah, that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening.